I woke up early, the hum of the refrigerator breaking the silence. My phone reminded me it was my birthday. But it was just another day, as it had been for years. Clara used to make a big deal out of it, burnt cakes, laughter, little surprises. Somewhere along the way, though, she stopped caring. Walking into the kitchen, I caught her humming softly. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if she remembered. Maybe there would be a small gesture. "Can you grab almond milk on your way home?" she asked, without a glance at the calendar. That was all. I bit back the words I wanted to say, nodded, and headed to the shower. What was the point? If she cared, she would have remembered. Work was no better. Between emails and dull meetings, one of my coworkers joked about midlife birthday blues. I laughed along, hiding the sting. My phone buzzed a few times, spam and app notifications, but no texts or calls from Clara. Returning home to a quiet house felt heavier than usual. Lily was at a friend's, and Clara was still out. I sank into the couch, our cat Luna curling up beside me. For a second, I thought about calling her, but why bother? She walked in later, juggling grocery bags, chatting on her phone. "Big plans for the weekend," she chirped, giving me a distracted peck on the cheek. I nodded and helped unpack, her obliviousness cutting deeper than I cared to admit. At midnight I sat in my office with a whiskey, flipping through an old photo album. One picture stood out, Clara and me on my 30th birthday, her arms around me as we laughed over a slightly burnt cake. I couldn't shake the thought, what happened to us? The next morning, she gasped as her eyes landed on the calendar. "Oh my God, Ethan, yesterday was your birthday!" Her face paled with guilt. I shrugged. "Was it?" She launched into apologies, promises, excuses. Work. Lily. Deadlines. I barely listened. I had heard it all before. "It's fine," I said flatly. But it wasn't fine. Our 15th anniversary was around the corner. This time, I decided, it was going to be different. Clara needed to know what it felt like to be invisible. The weeks leading up to our anniversary felt surreal. Clara dropped hints every chance she got. Torn magazine pages with vacation spots appeared on the counter, emails about anniversary gifts were conveniently left open on her laptop, and she made casual comments during dinner. "I was thinking," she said one night, swirling her wine dramatically. 15 years is a milestone. Maybe we could plan a trip. Something memorable." "Memorable," I repeated, setting down my fork. "Sounds nice." Her face lit up, clearly expecting more enthusiasm. I gave her nothing. Days passed, and her excitement only grew. She'd linger in front of jewelry stores at the mall or sigh dramatically during commercials featuring couples clinking champagne glasses. "Doesn't that look amazing?" she asked after one particularly cheesy ad. "Sure," I replied, not looking up from my book. She narrowed her eyes at me but didn't press. I could feel her analyzing every word, trying to figure out if I was secretly planning something. I wasn't. By the second week, her hints turned into direct prodding. "Ethan, our anniversary is coming up. Have you thought about what we should do?" "Not really," I said casually, flipping through the newspaper. She stared at me like I had just declared war on romance. "Not really? It's 15 years. You always plan something." I shrugged. "Do we have to make a big deal out of every single one?" Her jaw dropped. For a moment I thought she might throw her wine at me, but she caught herself, laughing nervously. "You're joking. You're planning something. Right?" I smiled faintly. "You'll see." The truth was, I was not planning a trip or a fancy dinner. For 15 years, I had carried the weight of making our anniversaries special. This time, I wanted her to feel the sting of being let down. The night before our anniversary, she stayed up late, moving around the house with nervous excitement. I watched from the couch as she hung a garment bag on the back of the bedroom door. "What's that?" I asked, gesturing toward it. She smiled coyly. "You'll see." I nodded, saying nothing. As she climbed into bed, she glanced at me, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. She had no idea what was coming. The alarm buzzed at 6 in the morning, but I was already awake. Clara stirred beside me, instinctively silencing the clock. "Morning," she murmured, stretching with a satisfied little sigh. She was brimming with excitement, I could tell. This day, to her, was supposed to be all about celebration. "Morning," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. She sat up quickly, glancing at me with a smile that begged for some kind of acknowledgement. I gave her nothing beyond a quick kiss on the forehead before heading to the shower. When I walked into the kitchen, the table was set with fresh coffee, toast, and fruit. Clara hummed softly as she moved around, a spring in her step. She had even put on the dress from the garment bag, a sleek and elegant number that hugged her figure in all the right ways. "Happy anniversary!" she beamed, practically glowing with anticipation. I paused mid-step, pretending to think. "Anniversary? Is that today?" Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she laughed nervously. "Very funny, Ethan. You almost had me." I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat at the table, and unfolded the newspaper without another word. She hovered near the counter, watching me closely, waiting for the big reveal she thought was coming. "So," she began, leaning casually against the counter. "What's the plan for today?" "Plan?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "I have a busy day at work, meetings, emails, the usual. Maybe we can grab dinner later?" Her jaw dropped, and this time, there was no hiding her shock. "Dinner later? Ethan, it's our 15th anniversary. You can't just squeeze it in like it's an afterthought." I leaned back in my chair, keeping my expression calm. "What did you have in mind?" She started, then stopped, clearly caught off guard. "I thought you'd surprise me." "You always do." I shrugged, my tone casual. "Not this year." Her eyes narrowed, searching my face for answers. "What's going on with you? You've been acting weird all week." I set my coffee down and met her gaze. "Do you remember what we did for my birthday last month?" Her lips parted slightly, confusion flashing across her face. "Your birthday?" "Yeah," I said, leaning forward. "What did we do?" She blinked, grasping for an answer. I think we... Oh wait, I had that deadline at work. But we celebrated, right? I meant to plan something." I nodded slowly, letting her stumble through her excuses. "Exactly. You meant to, but you didn't." Her arms crossed defensively. "What does that have to do with today? This is our anniversary, it's not the same. Isn't it?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because to me, it feels exactly the same. The only difference is, today it's your expectations that are not being met." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she was struggling to form words. You're trying to make a point," she said finally, her voice low. "You're punishing me." "I'm not punishing you, Clara," I said evenly. "I'm showing you what it feels like." The silence that followed was suffocating. Her cheeks flushed with anger, but I could see the realization dawning in her eyes. She hated it, but she understood. "Fine," she said sharply, her voice trembling. "If you want to ruin our anniversary to prove a point, go ahead. But do not expect me to sit here and take it." I smirked faintly. "I do not expect anything, Clara. That is kind of the whole point." She stormed out of the kitchen, muttering under her breath, and I let her go. I finished my coffee in silence, grabbed my keys, and left for work, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and unease. The day dragged on as I went through the motions at work, but my mind kept drifting back to Clara. Her expression when I told her I had no plans, the mixture of shock and disbelief, it played on a loop in my head. Part of me felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it down. This was not about hurting her, it was about balance, about making her see how it felt to be invisible. When I got home that evening, the house was dark except for the faint glow of the living room lamp. Clara sat on the couch, arms crossed, her expression a mix of anger and confusion. The tension in the room was palpable. "You're late," she said sharply as I set my keys on the counter. "Busy day," I replied nonchalantly. Meetings ran over. She stared at me, daring me to say something more, but I stayed quiet. Finally, she stood and walked over, her arms still crossed tightly across her chest. "Ethan, I need to know, did you really forget our anniversary?" she asked, her voice sharp and demanding. I leaned against the counter, meeting her gaze without flinching. "Why does it matter?" Her eyes widened, and she threw up her hands in exasperation. "Why does it matter? Are you serious? It is our 15th anniversary. You cannot just treat it like it is nothing." I stayed silent for a moment, letting her words hang in the air. Then I spoke, my tone calm but firm. "Clara, do you know how many of my birthdays you have forgotten?" Her face froze, her mouth slightly open. What does that have to do with this?" "Everything," I said, standing up straight. "For 15 years I have gone out of my way to make our anniversaries special. And for 15 years you have barely acknowledged my birthdays. That is not fair, Clara. That is not true," she snapped, shaking her head. "Isn't it?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. "Do you even remember what we did for my birthday last year? Or the year before that?" Her lips pressed into a tight line, and her silence spoke louder than any words could. "I am not bringing this up to hurt you," I continued, my tone softening slightly. "I am bringing it up because I need you to understand. Today, on our anniversary, you are finally feeling what I feel every single year, forgotten." She flinched at the word, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I never meant to make you feel that way," she whispered. "But you did," I said, cutting her off gently. "Over and over again. And you know what? I let it slide every time. I never brought it up because I did not want to ruin your day. I just swallowed it and moved on." Tears streamed down her face now, and for a moment, I almost felt bad. But then I remembered all the times I had sat alone, pretending it did not matter. I do not know what to say," she said, her voice trembling. "You do not have to say anything," I replied. "I just want you to understand." She turned away, wiping her eyes, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. "I did not realize it meant that much to you," she admitted after a long pause. "It is not about the birthday itself," I said, my voice soft but steady. "It is about the effort. The acknowledgement. Knowing that I matter enough for you to remember something as simple as a date. That is all I have ever wanted." She nodded slowly, her back still to me. "You are right," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "I have taken you for granted." I stayed quiet, giving her space to process. Finally, she turned around, her eyes red but resolute. "How do I fix this?" I took a deep breath, reached into my bag, and pulled out a small envelope. "Start by opening this." She hesitated, her fingers trembling slightly as she took the envelope from my hand. She stared at it for a moment before carefully tearing it open. Inside was a printed reservation for a weekend getaway at a lakeside resort, something I knew she had mentioned wanting to do years ago, but had never followed through on. Her eyes widened as she read the details. "You planned this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course I did," I said, crossing my arms. "Because despite everything, I love you. But this trip comes with one condition." She looked up at me, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What condition?" "No more forgetting," I said firmly. "No more excuses. If I can show up for you every year, you can do the same for me." Her lips parted as if she wanted to argue, but then she closed them, nodding instead. "You are right," she said softly. "You deserve that. I promise, Ethan, I will do better." For the first time that day, I felt a small weight lift off my chest. Maybe she finally understood. The rest of the evening passed quietly. Clara seemed more subdued than usual, her usual confidence replaced by a kind of nervous energy. She kept glancing at the reservation, her fingers tracing the edges of the paper as if grounding herself. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, the realization of how much she had overlooked sinking in. The weekend trip came faster than I expected. The resort was beautiful, nestled by a shimmering lake, surrounded by dense woods that seemed to stretch endlessly. Clara was unusually quiet as we unpacked in our suite. She kept stealing glances at me, as if trying to gauge my mood. That evening, we sat on the balcony, overlooking the water as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air was still, except for the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. "Ethan," she began, setting her wine glass down. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Why did you never bring this up before?" she asked, her voice careful. "All the times I forgot your birthday, all the times I made you feel invisible, why did you stay silent?" I stared at the darkening sky for a moment before answering. "Honestly? I thought it wasn't worth the fight. I told myself it didn't matter, that you were busy or distracted, and I should just let it go. But deep down, I was scared." "Scared of what?" she asked, leaning forward. "That you wouldn't care," I admitted. "That if I said something, you would brush it off, and it would hurt more than just staying quiet." Her face fell, and she reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. "I wouldn't have brushed it off, Ethan. I might have been distracted, but I would have listened. I would have tried. Maybe," I said with a faint smile. "But part of me didn't want to risk finding out." She squeezed my hand tightly, her voice resolute. "Well, I am listening now. And I swear to you, things are going to change." The next morning, Clara seemed different, more present, more intentional. As we walked along one of the trails by the lake, she pointed out little things she found beautiful: wildflowers poking through the dirt, the way the sunlight filtered through the trees. It was as if she was trying to see the world through new eyes. At one point, we stopped at a clearing with a breathtaking view of the lake below. Clara sat on a fallen log, catching her breath, and motioned for me to sit beside her. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice quiet, "about what you said. About how I didn't see you." I stayed silent, letting her continue. "I don't want to be that person anymore," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't want to miss the things that matter to you, your birthdays, your achievements, your feelings. They should matter just as much as mine. And I want to make sure they do." Her sincerity caught me off guard. I could see it in her eyes, hear it in her voice. She meant it. "This isn't about keeping score, Clara," I said softly. "It's not about who forgot what or who did more. It's about both of us showing up for each other. That's all I've ever wanted." She nodded, wiping at her eyes. "I know. And I'm going to start showing up. I promise." The final day at the resort was calm, almost too quiet. Clara seemed lost in thought as we packed up, occasionally pausing to glance out the window at the shimmering lake. I could tell she was replaying our conversations in her head, letting everything sink in. As we drove back home, the silence between us felt heavier. Clara turned to me at one point, her voice hesitant. "Ethan, I know this trip was supposed to help us reconnect, but I feel like I have barely scratched the surface of what I need to fix." I glanced at her, surprised by her honesty. "It's not about fixing everything at once, Clara. It's about starting somewhere." She nodded, biting her lip. I don't want to screw this up again." Back at home, the normalcy of our routine crept back in, but things felt different. Clara's efforts to show up were small but noticeable. She left little notes on my desk, asked more about my day, and even remembered to buy my favorite coffee beans without me mentioning it. It was a far cry from how things had been, but it was a start. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching TV, she handed me a notebook. "What's this?" I asked, flipping it open. "It's a list," she said softly, "of everything I want to remember about you, your favorite foods, things that make you laugh, moments that mean a lot to you." I stared at her, stunned. "You made this for me?" She nodded, her cheeks flushing. "I don't want to forget anymore, Ethan. I want to get it right this time." For the first time in years, I felt truly seen. Clara's resolve to make things better showed in unexpected ways. One evening, she surprised me with a new entry in her notebook. "I want to rewrite the moments I missed. she said, handing me a page where she had detailed how she wished she had celebrated my last birthday, a quiet dinner at my favorite steakhouse, followed by a night under the stars. It's not perfect, she said, her voice trembling. But I want you to know that I see those gaps now. And I'm sorry. I pulled her into a hug, my throat tight with emotion. Thank you, Clara. This means more than you know. Months later, on my birthday, Clara followed through. She planned a surprise dinner with friends, ordered my favorite cake, and even wrote a heartfelt card. As I blew out the candles, I glanced at her, seeing the determination in her eyes. This wasn't about guilt anymore. It was about love, real and intentional. A few weeks after my birthday, Clara decided it was time to address something bigger, the anniversary dinner we never had. Let's do it right this time, she said one morning, sliding a piece of paper across the table. On it was a list of friends and family she wanted to invite, along with menu ideas she had carefully curated. You're really putting effort into this, I said, a touch of surprise in my voice. She smiled faintly. I want to show you that I mean it, Ethan. This isn't just about the anniversary. It's about everything. On the day of the dinner, I walked into the dining room to find Clara meticulously setting the table. Candles flickered gently, floral centerpieces graced the table, and the smell of roasted chicken wafted through the air. She had spared no detail. This looks amazing, I said, genuinely impressed. She turned to me, flushed from rushing around. You think so? I just wanted it to be perfect. It's more than perfect, I said, kissing her on the cheek. You've outdone yourself. By the time the guests arrived, Clara was in full hostess mode, greeting everyone with hugs and warm smiles. Our daughter Lily helped pass out drinks, and even Luna the cat weaved through people's legs like she was part of the celebration. When dinner was served, the atmosphere was warm and lively. Clara's efforts didn't go unnoticed, and for the first time in years, I felt like an equal partner in the celebration. She made a point of highlighting my role in planning the weekend trip, something she rarely did in the past. Ethan really went above and beyond this year, she said, catching my eye with a sincere smile. It was one of the best weekends we've ever had. Hearing her say that in front of everyone felt like validation, not just for the trip but for all the years I had quietly carried the emotional weight of our relationship. After dinner, Clara surprised me again. She clinked her glass, and the room fell silent. I just want to say a few words, she began, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. Thank you all for being here to celebrate 15 years of marriage with us. It means so much to share this milestone with people we love. She paused, her gaze settling on me. But most importantly, I want to thank Ethan. For 15 years, he has been my rock, my partner, and my biggest supporter. And while I haven't always been the best at showing it, I want you to know how much you mean to me. Her voice trembled slightly, but she pressed on. This past year has been a wake-up call for me. It made me realize that love isn't just about big milestones. It's about the little moments we sometimes take for granted. And I know I've taken you for granted, Ethan, more times than I care to admit. The room was silent, all eyes on her as she finished. So tonight, I want to make a promise, to you, to myself, and to everyone here, that I will do better. I will be better. Because you deserve that. The applause was thunderous, but all I could see was Clara, tears brimming in her eyes, her sincerity shining through. When she sat back down, she reached for my hand under the table. Thank you for not giving up on me, she whispered. I never will, I replied softly, giving her hand a squeeze. Later that night, after the guests had left and the house was quiet, Clara and I sat together on the couch, sharing the last slice of cake. The exhaustion from hosting had softened her usual energy, leaving her calm and reflective. Did I do okay tonight? She asked hesitantly, her voice small. I looked at her and smiled. You did more than okay. You made me feel seen, Clara. That's all I've ever wanted. She leaned her head on my shoulder, letting out a soft sigh. I'm going to keep trying, Ethan. I promise. I kissed the top of her head, feeling something I hadn't in years, peace. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the weight of our relationship alone. The morning after the anniversary dinner, I woke up to the smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen. Clara was already up, her laptop open and a notebook beside her. She looked up when I walked in, a faint smile on her face. "Morning," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "Morning," she replied, closing the laptop. "I was just jotting down some ideas." "For what?" I asked, leaning against the counter. "For your birthday next year," she said, her cheeks flushing. "I know it's months away, but I want to plan it right this time." I stared at her, caught between surprise and disbelief. "Clara, you don't have to do all that." "I know I don't have to," she said, standing and walking over to me. "But I want to. This is important to me, Ethan. You're important to me." Her words hung in the air, filling the room with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. I set my mug down and pulled her into a hug. "If this is the new you, I think I'm going to like it." "It's not the new me," she said, her voice muffled against my chest. "It's the me I should have been all along." Over the following months, Clara's efforts didn't waver. It wasn't about grand gestures anymore. It was the little things that mattered most. She left notes in my lunch bag, asked about my day and actually listened to my answers, and even surprised me with my favorite dessert after a long day at work. For the first time in years, I felt like a priority in her life. One evening, she handed me a thick envelope. "What's this?" I asked, carefully opening it. "It's my way of rewriting history," she said, her voice tinged with nerves. Inside were pages of handwritten notes and printed emails. She had chronicled all the birthdays and milestones she had overlooked, rewriting them as if they had gone differently. For my 40th birthday, she described a day where we spent the evening under the stars with a bottle of wine. For another, she wrote about a quiet dinner at my favorite restaurant. "I know I can't change the past," she said, her hands trembling slightly. "But I wanted to acknowledge it, to own up to the times I let you down, and to show you that I'm serious about doing better." I flipped through the pages, my throat tightening as I read her words. "You didn't have to do this, Clara." "I know," she said, her voice cracking. "But I wanted to. You deserve to know how much I care." I closed the envelope and pulled her into my arms. "This means more to me than you'll ever know." Months later, when my birthday finally arrived, it was nothing short of perfect. Clara had planned everything: dinner with friends, a cake in my favorite flavor, and even a surprise trip to the mountains for the weekend. But what mattered most wasn't the elaborate plans. It was the way she looked at me when I blew out the candles, the way she held my hand when we opened the gifts together. "I hope I got it right this time," she said nervously as we sat by the fireplace later that evening. "You did," I said, smiling at her. "You got it exactly right." Months after my birthday, things felt genuinely different. Clara wasn't just making promises anymore, she was following through. The changes were subtle but undeniable: a note tucked into my briefcase, her taking the time to ask me about the details of my day, even small surprises like cooking my favorite meal without an occasion. It was not about grand gestures anymore, it was about consistency. But it was not all perfect. Old habits die hard, and there were moments where her instinct to retreat into her own world resurfaced. One evening, as I walked into the house after a long day at work, I found Clara scrolling on her phone, absent-mindedly ignoring the dinner burning on the stove. "Clara," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet. She jumped, dropping her phone onto the counter. "Ethan, I'm so sorry," she stammered, rushing to save the smoking pan. "I got distracted," I sighed, taking the pan from her hands. "It's not just about the food," I said evenly. "It's about being present." Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. Instead, she nodded, her voice small. "I know. I'm still working on it." A few weeks later, we were invited to a neighborhood barbecue. Clara seemed unusually nervous, fidgeting with her clothes and double-checking the dish she had made. It wasn't like her to be anxious about social gatherings. "What's going on?" I asked as we walked to the backyard party. I I don't want people to think I'm not a good wife, she admitted quietly. The comment caught me off guard. Clara, you don't need to prove anything to anyone. This is about us, not them. She nodded but stayed quiet, her lips pressed into a thin line. At the party, things were mostly fine, until one of the women made a casual joke about forgetful wives. I could see Clara tense up, her face reddening as laughter rippled through the group. I used to be like that, she said suddenly, her voice louder than intended. The table turned their attention to her. I used to take Ethan for granted. But I've been working on it, and I won't let that happen again. The group exchanged glances, the awkwardness palpable. I put a hand on Clara's shoulder, offering a reassuring squeeze. We all have things to work on, I said, breaking the tension. Later, as we walked home, she was quiet. Did I embarrass you? She finally asked. No, I said firmly. But you don't have to explain yourself to everyone. The only person who matters in this is me. She nodded, her expression softening. You're right. I'm so afraid of messing this up. A month later, Clara surprised me with something I never expected. I came home to find her sitting at the dining table with a journal in front of her. The pages were filled with neat handwriting, sketches, and even clippings from old photos. What's this? I asked, setting down my briefcase. It's everything I've been working on, she said, sliding the journal toward me. Thoughts, plans, ways I can make our relationship stronger. Things I want to do for you, for us. I opened it carefully, flipping through the pages. She had written about how she wanted to plan small surprises for me, create new traditions, and prioritize the little things that mattered to me. On one page, she had listed out memories she wanted to recreate, like our first dinner date at the small Italian place downtown. This is thoughtful, I said, struggling to find the right words. I know it's not perfect, she said quickly, her voice tinged with nervousness. But I wanted to show you how serious I am. I'm not just saying I'll change, Ethan. I'm doing it. I closed the journal and looked at her. It means a lot, Clara. Thank you. Her shoulders relaxed, and for the first time that evening she smiled. You're welcome. The journal became a symbol of her commitment. Every time she did something new, whether it was planning a small date night or leaving a heartfelt note in my car, she would write it down in the journal, documenting her progress. She even asked me to contribute, jotting down my thoughts or moments I appreciated. It wasn't always smooth sailing. One evening, during a quiet dinner at home, Clara brought up something that had been weighing on her. Ethan, she said, pushing her plate aside. Do you think you'll ever forgive me for all the times I let you down? Her question took me by surprise. I set down my fork and studied her face, searching for the right response. I don't think forgiveness is about a single moment, Clara. It's about the effort you're making every day. And I see it. That's enough for me. She nodded slowly, but her eyes remained downcast. I just wish I could undo some of the hurt. You can't undo the past, I said gently. But you're changing the future, and that's what matters. By the time our 16th anniversary rolled around, Clara's transformation was undeniable. The dinner she planned was simple but heartfelt. There was no grand show or elaborate display, just a quiet evening at home with our closest friends. She stood up midway through the meal to make a toast. This past year has been the most important one of my life, she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. It's taught me that love isn't about big gestures or perfect moments. It's about the small, consistent things we do to show each other we care. And Ethan, you've shown me that more times than I can count. I just hope I've started to show you the same. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I raised my glass and said softly, to Clara and to us. As the evening mooned down, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, hope. It wasn't the perfect ending, but it was real, and it was enough. A week after our 16th anniversary, Clara handed me the journal again. This time, it was nearly full. She had added entries about everything, small moments she cherished, future plans, and even reflections on the struggles we had overcome. Ethan, she said as I flipped through the pages. This is for both of us now. Not just for me to document what I've done, but for us to build something together. I looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. I think we already have. She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. Then let's keep going. Months later, I caught Clara quietly sitting in the living room, staring at an old photo of us from years ago. It was a picture I hadn't seen in ages, her arms wrapped around me as we laughed over a birthday cake, one of the few times she had planned something for me back then. What's on your mind? I asked, sitting down beside her. She sighed, setting the photo on the coffee table. I've been thinking about how far we've come. How different things could have been if I'd kept going the way I was. But you didn't. I reminded her. You changed. We both did. She reached for my hand, her grip firm. And I'll keep changing, Ethan. I'll never stop trying. I squeezed her hand and smiled. Neither will I. That night, as we lay in bed, Clara curled up beside me, her head resting on my chest. The room was quiet except for the sound of her steady breathing. Ethan? She murmured. Yeah? Are you happy? She asked softly. I thought about everything, the pain, the frustration, the moments when I thought things would never improve. And then I thought about now. About how far we had come. Yeah, I said, my voice steady. I am. She smiled against my chest, her voice a whisper. Me too. As I held her close, I realized something. It wasn't about perfect resolutions or grand gestures. It was about showing up, every day, and choosing each other over and over again. And for the first time in a long time, I knew we both were.